Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Video, Sound and Picture Mastering for Film Festivals. Really excited to be bringing this information to everyone and going through some of these details. So yeah, I want to welcome everyone and thanks for joining us. My name is Tom Strnad. I'm the lead digital artist of the Creator Space, and I put up some information so you can check out the events.tbmcs.ca, so you can check out some more upcoming webinars. Also, you can visit our website for more information. It also has a link to our YouTube channel where you can catch a whole bunch of things on video editing, digital video, cinematography, sound stuff, working with iPads and everything. So there's tons of stuff out there. So we hope you can enjoy some more of our resources, and please feel free to check out our library partners as well. So on that note, I want to thank all of our partners in this project. So we have the Canada Council for the Arts, and then we also have our library partners. So we have the Blue Mountains Public Library, Collingwood Public Library, and the Wasaga Beach Public Library. So in terms of access, you can get access to equipment and computers through the library. So go to our website, you can see more details there, and we hope you can access and use some of the technology. So we have the Blackmagic Pocket 4K camera, we have 360 video cameras, sound recording kits, iPads, and all sorts of stuff that can be accessed. So please remember that there is all the tech that's available through our libraries as well. So if you're in the South Georgian Bay area and a member of any of these libraries, please check them out. Okay, so let's start up. We've got a lot to talk about. I mentioned here, if you have questions, just put them in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom, and we'll get to them at the end with a Q&A. So that we'll have plenty of time for that. So yeah, let's dive right into this. So it's a really fun topic. I should mention that what I'm talking about is also some of my opinions, and I'm not necessarily saying that there's only one way to do it. Just like with everything, there's multiple ways to do it. You might already have other workflows you like to use and so on. But we're going to talk about some of the main basics and tech specs and things that you'll hear. And hopefully it will demystify and maybe clarify, and also will just help if you have a film or video that you need to get to a festival, or you want to put it online, or you need to finish it. We'll even get into the idea of some broadcast mastering in the session as well. So how do you master your film or video? It's fine and dandy that you finished editing it, you've done the color grading, you've done the sound mix, and then how do you master it? I think what's really important about this session too is sometimes it's a good idea to know what you need to do in the mastering before you even start the production. So this is a really common thing when we talk about in writing and any kind of digital technology or digital arts, is you really need to know what your final goal is in order to start off on the right foot. It could be a lot of extra work if you shoot in video, for example, different frame rates than what can be an easier way to work with in terms of finishing and so on. So that's what we're going to really talk about, is by knowing this, it can really help you in the pre-production before you even start doing your next video. Okay, so we're going to talk today about mastering. What is mastering? Look at sound formats. We're going to talk about something called loudness monitoring. Then we're getting into video formats and a bit of an overview. I know some of you have joined us in past sessions where we talk about video formats, but we'll talk about those. Cinema formats. What does it mean? Because theatrical or theaters showing things are different than just a video. So there's the cinema formats. We'll talk about video frame rates, cinema frame rates, and then we're going to get into DCP, which is digital cinema packaging. So that's going to be kind of one of our last things there as well. So yeah, really lots to cover. So what is mastering? And again, this is a kind of a broad, brush strokes of the topic, but mastering in the world of film and video, essentially the creation of a high quality video file that contains the final color graded and sound mixed film and video. Now this master will end up being used to release the film and video. So we're talking about, putting it to film festivals, online screening, so putting it on YouTube, Vimeo, potentially to broadcasters. Someone wants to show it, CBC is interested in your documentary. How do you get it to them? And also the master becomes a final archive of the finished work, because we could end up with 5 terabytes of data on drives, and it could be you should store it. I highly recommend archiving and storing, but that finished film, that master is really, really important to have a high quality, big master. So not a highly compressed master, a big master, like full resolution master. And that becomes your archive so that you can, use that. So these files can be big. They might be, 20 gigs for a film. And that's okay, because we want a big file master. And that's really what we're trying to do with mastering, is to create this final master video. So in the past, in working in film, something that's different, we'd end up doing shooting on negative. Then you go to create prints from the negative, and then you can do like a scan, and that would go to a digital format or a tape. Now, the negative becomes your original material. Then you do a neg cut, which is just cutting the film to how it was edited, and then you make prints. The prints are what would get released to the theaters. So around the world, you'd ship out these prints that were printed from the negative, or copies of the negative. So these internegatives were copies of the negative, and those were important because those were backups. So negative is always that big backup idea. All the shot negative, there could be millions and millions of feet of originally shot footage, just as we might have hundreds of hours of originally shot video. That negative that was cut, the conformed final picture, that's what's really important in making copies of it. Just like this master is really important, making copies of it, archiving it, keeping it somewhere safe, having multiple copies. That, in essence, your master becomes more important than your original footage once you're done. Now, I know we talk about this in other sessions in editing. You're not always necessarily done, but we want to aim for the fact that we think we're done. So, we've locked the picture, we're releasing the film, this is how we want the world and the public to see it. So that master is really important to archive more than anything else, because if you lose the master, then you end up having nothing, because you might not have backed up your footage, or a hard drive with all the footage might get corrupt, right? So then we need that master to really help keep us going. Okay, so video formats. So these consist of the amount of horizontal and vertical lines. So these resolution ideas. So formats, originally we started with an SD format, which is standard definition, 720 by 480, vertical by horizontal. So really, we're used to these screens now, but we were talking about, this was 720 by 480, right? So all of this part's gone, right? So that kind of 720 by 480 was the original standard definition. So again, so what, 720 lines this way going across, and 480 lines going horizontally, right? So horizontal, vertical to horizontal. There's always a larger amount, because you can see there's a lot more lines on the vertical and less lines on the horizontal, because there's more up than down. Okay, so that's the first part of the format. Sound formats, here's another thing. So sound formats, essentially we're talking about two main formats that you'll hear out there and deal with in the world of independent filmmaking. And there's a lot more now. There's all these special Dolby Atmos and additional formats that are out there that you'll hear about, and theaters will advertise to try and say, hey, we got this more new cutting edge type of sound. But really what we're still dealing with is the world of stereo and 5.1 surround sound. So what does that mean? So stereo consists of a left and right track, and it's most common for desktop editing. And then surround sound consists of basically 6 tracks. So we have a left, center, we have a left, center, right. So instead of just left, right, we now have a left, center, right. Then we have a left surround, right surround, and we have a subwoofer. So that's a total of 6 tracks. So left, center, right, left surround, subwoofer. And it requires a system capable of mixing that and to play those 6 tracks back. So generally, the stereo left, right is the most common for desktop editing. So like what I'm demoing on today, just a desktop editing system. It's a Mac Mini. We're using Resolve in it and just working in stereo. Now, if you upgrade, you can have Resolve. There's the Fairlight sound component, so that can work in surround sound. But you need some sort of audio card that can export, or a sound device that can play out those 6 tracks. So you can actually monitor it. Because it doesn't matter if you mix in 5.1 and you can't monitor it. we don't know what it's going to sound like. So generally we're going to be working in stereo. We might be doing some surround things, and we're going to do some surround demos and sessions in the future in some more videos. So check those out as well. Then there's also some ambisonic sound stuff that are like virtual reality type things, and more different types of, and like I said, Dolby Atmos. So there's, there can be like 11 speaker setups and all this kind of stuff. So there's more and more stuff. But in the independent film world, generally we're just dealing with stereo, 5.1 surround, and that's what festivals will be asking for you. Do you have a stereo mix? Do you have a 5.1 surround mix? Stereo ends up working quite well, especially for like short films, independent films. It fills the theater, it's a nice sound. So, you know, don't sweat trying to get into 5.1 surround if you're just finishing on a desktop. Okay, so moving on, sound tech specs. So then we'll get back to the video formats, but that was the intro of just like how, you know, the basic video format, we came from 720 by 480, and then you'll see how we're going to advance and move into other things. So the best mastering format for sound is the WAV format. So in most festivals and in broadcasters, so the specs of what will be demanded, and you know, you can't really choose. This is really what's demanded is 48 kilohertz, so how many samples per second, and at a 24-bit depth. So sometimes there's 16-bit, sometimes there's 24-bit options, but you want to be in 24-bit depth. You can always change 16 to 24, and you can always change 44.1 kilohertz to 48 kilohertz without, you know, really a noticeable difference, but you will need to convert at some point, and it's going to make it be in that format. And that's kind of your final. So if you work in 48 kilohertz and 24-bit depth from the beginning in your project, I'll show you guys. We can do this in the sound specs of Resolve. That's the most common and best practice of what your spec should be. MP4 files, I note here, should just be used for previews, and if you're emailing it, but you shouldn't be using that as an archive or mastering format at all, because it's highly compressed. It's great for like putting on iTunes, taking it on the go, but it's not for mastering and for delivery to broadcasters or to film festivals at all. Now, mastering sound, you know, so sound can be mastered on its own, and I just wanted to touch on this just a bit, and especially for when we're creating the DCP, the digital cinema package. It should be a stereo, multiple mono, left and right wave file, and then this results as a separate left wave and right wave known as L and R. So that's what we're doing. We can master a wave from our mixed, you know, edited file. In our locked picture in Resolve, we can output just the audio. So you can master just your audio. This would be the same for 5.1 stereo surround sound. You would have the, you know, LR, so it would be LCR, LS for left surround, RS for right surround, and then LFE for the subwoofer. So those would be the 6 tracks in that format. Okay, loudness monitoring. So this gets really, it's a big topic. I just wanted to touch on this a bit. There's become a standard just because I think become, you know, we're probably aware of this, but in commercials, when you're watching something, commercials start getting really loud. So you'd be watching, you know, you'd be watching a sports game or, you know, an awards ceremony, and the commercials are blaring loud. So what broadcasters did, they started doing something called loudness monitoring or limitations. So what your total, you know, loudness range can be, so that you're not going, you know, super loud over making it louder than the program. So the idea was commercials would be really loud, so if you went to the washroom or you went to the kitchen, you could still hear the commercial. So that was, you know, viewed as not being a good thing for people and their ears. So they started doing a loudness limits for broadcast. And I note here theaters don't have any limits, but essentially if you use the same standard, it's a preferred idea. They don't have an exact standard, but everyone's really working to the same idea. General spec is minus 23. So it's basically, if you think about a 23 decibel total range from the quietest to the loudest area. So it's kind of trying to just, you know, generalize what does that mean. So think of it that way, that kind of range, 23 decibels. So on your overall meter, when you're mixing, you know, you can see like what's the quietest, what's the loudest, and now we have all these meters that can give us this target range and tell us that we're within it. I think what I'm going to be showing today, I was looking at it, has about, I think, a 16 to 22 decibel target range. So we're within it, and that's kind of good to know. Now what I noted here too is that in mixing, if I recommend a target of -6 decibel on your master meter as the loudest dialogue. And dialogue will tend to be your loudest part. I wouldn't really make sound effects or music that loud unless there's really a need for it. But I suggest music to be at about -10 in that kind of range, unless you really need a big like crescendo or orchestrally or something, there's something important. This will give you a solid mix range. So if you don't go over the -6, that basically ends up working out to the loudness monitoring. So it's been kind of my rule of thumb, work in that range. Don't go above -6. 0 is your maximum, and that's the distortion clipping zone. So -6 is just healthy under there. Generally, the meters tend to just be yellow, and you won't get into what's called the red range of the meters. So if you're mixing in yellow, then everything's pretty safe, and you have a good amount of dynamic range. And again, music, try to go about -10 is nice in the view meters, and then go from there. Now, resolve, I note here, and I'll demo through it after, has a loudness monitoring. Yellow means that there's a short burst. Red, that it could be potentially exceeding the loudness limitations. So not a big issue, but it just gives you some warnings. Then it tells you your overall target. So that's really cool that it has those yellow and red kind of warnings. You can play stuff back and see how close you are to your range. Okay, so here's the video format chart. So let's get back to video. We talked about sound, finish up sound. Now we go into video. So what is it? So SD, I mentioned before, 720 by 480. HD, we go into 1920 by 1080. So again, the vertical lines to horizontal lines. This image isn't necessarily to scale, but it just gives you some quick kind of comparisons. Ultra HD, also known as like 4K, is 3840 by 2160. So you can see we're just jumping, like double 1080 becomes ×2, becomes 2160. And then 4K DCI, which is the cinema standard, and we'll get to that as we talk about cinema formats, is 4096 by 2160. So it's just giving us more vertical lines, but the same amount of horizontal. So these are tons of different numbers. Great thing is you guys can rewatch this. If you're logged in here, you can rewatch this, and we're also going to post this on YouTube as well. So you can rewatch and go through all these tech specs and charts again. Because I know it's a lot of information, but it's good information. Cinema formats 2K. And this is the main area that for independent filmmakers where we'll be working in is this 2K format. Most cinemas out there play films in 2K. There's not a lot of 4K. It's slowly coming in, especially in Canada, North America. So those are usually those specialized theaters like the Ultra AVX and things. They'll be potentially in 4K. But for example, here, the Collingwood Theatre, you're watching everything in 2K. So it's kind of, just a little bit more than HD. But again, it's a big screen and, playing things back at a certain frame rate with certain projection quality that gives you that cinematic experience. So that's like, the contrast that it's portraying and then, being in that environment. So at the end of the day, 2K is not that much bigger than HD, and that's kind of what we're mastering. So if you've shot in HD, that would be a great, kind of minimum. You wouldn't want to shoot in less than 1920 by 1080 as a starting point. So that's definitely where you'd want to start. And then here's the 2K DCI. So just a bunch of resolution information. So the native resolution of the full 2K DCI, so this is just the projector playing it out without any cropping, is 2048 by 1080. And that gives us an aspect ratio of 1.9 to 1. Now aspect ratios are essentially, so if this pencil equals 1, so it would be 1.9, almost two pencils wide by one pencil high. So that's almost a 2 to 1 idea, right? So that's kind of how you think of aspect ratios. The flat cropped is 1998 by 1080, and that's where we get into an aspect ratio of 185 to 1. And that is the traditional film aspect ratio for a long time. Probably, in the 70s, 80s, that was one of the kind of normal theatrical ratios that a lot of films that we watch are still not. It's very similar to 16 by 9. So oftentimes films will just get kind of squeezed into 16 by 9. It's just a slight difference. So 1.85, like what you're watching right now, there'd basically like a little pencil hair like on top would be kind of what the letterboxing would be to put 185 into the 16 by 9. So it's almost the same. So usually what happens is you just zoom in a touch and then you have 185 becomes 16 by 9 for showing it on television. Then there's the cropped CinemaScope. Now this is the widescreen aspect ratio that we know and love in cinema a lot of times. So this becomes 2048 by 858. So you can see it's giving us a lot of the vertical and only 900 horizontal, and that gives us the aspect ratio of 239 to 1. And that's essentially on this kind of an image, we'd have kind of like my hand on top and bottom, that kind of gives you the 239 across, right? So that's a cool idea. So what is DCI? It means Digital Cinema Initiatives, basically a regulatory standards association that just decides what these specs should be so that everyone can create things to that. So that's really important is in this mastering concept is that there needs to be standards so that everyone says, hey, I'm doing a 2K DCI master, and then you know what it is. So the film festival knows what they're getting, and there isn't like a confusion of like, hey, I decided to make it this size, and they go, well, we don't want that size, right? So this way, by using some standards, just like HD has a standard, Ultra HD, we have these cinema standards as well. Now, just for comparison, here's the 4K one. So they're basically just doubled up. Same idea. You have the native 185, 239. So it's 4096 by 2160, as we mentioned before. So that's the 4K DCI. And then we have the 3996 by 2160. That's the 185. So it's just a bit of a crop. And then the CinemaScope 4096 by 1716. So this could be 4K DCP. Probably, for most of us, we won't be doing 4K DCPs. Most festivals don't even ask for that. They just want 2K. But it's just a comparison. As theaters move into using this format, it might be something that becomes a standard soon. So that's just something to look at. Now, what does that mean? So again, 3840 by 2160 is our Ultra HD. So we might shoot in that. So you can see 3996 is pretty close to 3840. So you can just up the resolution to 3996 from 3840. So that Ultra HD format can work really well in terms of being able to convert it to 4K, right? So that's that kind of downgrading too. So we'll talk a bit about that, but you basically can up resolution HD to 2K because it's just 1920 instead of 2048. So it's just a little bit more. So we can just kind of zoom in and up res and fill in the pixels and the information. It's reasonable. Same with the Ultra HD. We can just up res it to that. And then if we shot in 4K, then we can down sample it to 2K. So if you have more, it's a lot easier to make something smaller from bigger. It's super easy, and you're not really losing any quality. You're just making a smaller version, right? So 4K can be rendered into 2K or HD as well. So again, you can see if you can master and shoot in 4K first, then you can make additional submasters that could be HD and a 2K DCP. And that's really fun, or even for internet use, for web use. So if you go back now, you'd say, okay, at a minimum, I got to shoot HD, and if I can shoot Ultra HD, that's great, because then I have this higher quality master that I can create many masters from, and I'm kind of getting future ready. So if you can shoot 4K, if you can't, for storage purposes or camera purposes or what you have access to, then at least shoot HD. I wouldn't shoot in the smaller HD, which is the 1280 one. So definitely stay to the full HD 1920 by 1080, because anything less than that is going to have repercussions in this mastering process. Okay, so let's move on from here. Video frame rates. So, how many frames per second? And, that can get complicated, but, people are always like, what frame rate should I use? So originally we were in video was, 30 frames per second. That's what we hear a lot, and that's been around for a long time. But film, from, over 100 years now, and especially once sync sound happened, runs at 24 frames per second. And all of the cinema formatting or cinema mastering, the DCPs, will require 24 frame per second mastering as well. So when it comes to being screened in a theater, DCPs, there are some exceptions. You can do different frame rates now, but generally most festivals will want, either 24 frames per second. In Europe, it could be 25 frames per second, but they can still play 24. So if you master a film you're in 24 for theatrical cinema use, that's great. And then, for video, what's the right frame rate? So let's look at some of the frame rates that are available. So in HD and Ultra HD, we have a bunch of frame rates that are available. And 2398 is one of them. And this basically is, it has the color burst, so 0.02 frames per second required just to synchronize video for broadcast. So this format was created so that it can be manipulated into 2997, which is the other broadcast video frame rate. So it's kind of a real, to make a long story short, 2398 is a format that is made to emulate video in the NTSC format. And so that's a great shooting format, and we'll talk about that more. 24, you can shoot exactly 24 frames, especially with the Blackmagic Pocket 4K cameras that you can access through our library partners. 24 exact can be shot. You can shoot 29.7, you can shoot 30 exactly. Not really sure why you'd shoot an exact 30, but you can. Then you can shoot 48 if you want to double up the 24. That's becoming popular now, and there can be enhanced motion capture, so less blur. 5994, this is kind of what's been adopted for HD in the broadcast use, especially for sports, because it has 60 frames per second, so really sharp for action. Then there can be a straight 60, and then in the bottom here, I think it's just cut off a little bit with our logo, but 120 frames per second. That's what Gemini Man was captured in, and it's kind of an experiment in ultra hyper realism. Not very many cameras do that, or they'll use that as for slow motion. So you shoot 120 frames per second, you play it back at 24, and then you get the slow motion effect. But this one that film was shot in that range, and it gets converted. So I think there is only half a dozen theaters that could play 120 frames, so it's way, way ahead of its time. Will that be something? Who knows? We'll see. But right now, at the end of the day, 24 frames is still used, widely used, over 100 years now. And 2398 is a great format to start in. So, frame rates for mastering. This is that whole idea now. Again, we're going to just talk about this and how do we get ready to master by knowing what our frame rate should be, right? So if we look at the general mastering frame rate for North America, I recommend, and again, this is my opinion, 2397. Filming in that is really great. That's a perfect mastering frame rate for your production, for shooting any kind of film or video, if you like that look. Because from there, what happens is you can slow it down to do a 2K DCI and make it 24 frames and so on. So here's what are the frame rates. So that's the most used one in for North America for film, television work. 2397 is a very common standard. 2K DCI tends to be 24. It can be 48. It is available in that frame rate. But generally, these are the kind of the two most worldwide available frame rates. There's always exceptions to specific countries, but that's kind of that. 4K DCI tends to just be 24 frames per second just because of the larger data. So that's been kind of the generally accepted practice there too. But again, that can be It can deal, a lot of projectors, computers can play multiple frame rates in the DCI format. I'm just giving the most common used frame rates. And then television mastering tends to be 5994 or 2397. So that's kind of the broadcast mastering. So that's, again, a good kind of list of what it goes. So what frame rate should I master in? So here's my answer. The best frame rate that you can work in is 2397. Because at that frame rate, what happens is it can be sped up to play at 24 frames per second. So 0.03% faster. So it just gets sped up. Your program becomes 0.03% shorter, which is very negligible. But that allows you to go 2397. You can then put it into festivals that want 24 frames per second. It can also be made 25 frames per second because you can speed it up at 1.03. So you can get, speed it up to 25. So 2397 played at 25. That's how North American television gets delivered to Europe at 25 frames per second. We just do a speed up, and that means the audio and everything. Again, it's not noticeable. There can be some pitch shifting people do, but you just generally just speed it up. And then the 2397 can also be pulled down, and that means you're adding frames at a 3-2 pull down, it's called. And that lets you make a 30 or 5994 version as well. And that's something that we're probably used to a lot. 24 frames with some pull down gives you the the film look in video. And that's always been kind of the holy grail of, how do you make digital video look more filmic or cinematic? 24 frames, and then it's in 30. So that means for every third frame, there's a in-between frame made to basically add 6 frames per second so that we can make it 24 to 30. And that just gives us that little bit of extra thing. So if you went frame by frame for a film that was converted to video, you'll see those pull down frames where there's one frame looks like the next frame, but it's a combination of the frame before it and the frame after it to make an in-between frame. So that happens every 2 frames, and then it builds up to 6 new frames. And that's that look that we're very used to when things are 24 frames and projected at 30 frames, which is how most of television is screened at 30 or 60. Okay, so again, a lot of information. You can rewatch this and go over that. But this is my best recommendation. Is go 2397 as the rate to work in. Broadcast safe. So we've done color grading. We talked about color grading. Here's the main thing that I'm going to touch on this. The brightest to darkest in luminance, light, dark, and chrominance, you want it to be in the 0 to 100 scale. And I'll show you guys we can engage a broadcast safe filter in Resolve for exporting, and that makes it broadcast safe. Video mastering formats. Essentially, here's a great list. What I recommend again is ProRes HQ 422. That's the best overall master. That's what I master in generally for festivals, for TV delivery. Next, I recommend a QuickTime MOV using the H.264 codec. That's great for online web, so YouTube, Vimeo. That's how we do all of our mastering. We go QuickTime MOVs. Then the other thing would be the DCP 2K, and that's what you'll need for film festivals or theatrical screenings. So for example, if you wanted to have your film, you can book, times in theaters, let's say Cineplex, so you want to play your film there. You need to create a DCP 2K and bring it on a hard drive, and then they can play it back from there. Quick note, Avid makes a format called DNxHD, and I like this format as an archive, and it can be delivered to some broadcasters too. It tends to be a bit smaller than ProRes, and I believe the quality, in my opinion, is even a little bit better. So I like to sometimes master in that as my archive as well. So that's just a little side note. If you're ever looking at that, Avid has a great DNxHD format. Resolve can go out in that format too. So it's kind of a codec that's available to most editing software to use. Okay, so DCP, Digital Cinema Package. What this does is it takes your film, makes it ready to be screened in a theater. So it's a package of files, and it includes an MXF video file and also the audio files. Then the DCP player, so computer, usually just using software at this point, utilizes this to screen your film and video in a theater. There's multiple frame rates, but I just recommend, and the program I'm going to show you guys just defaults to 24 frames per second at 2K DCI for worldwide festival use, because that's very common, and every single theater in the world that has a DCP player will be able to play your 24 frame film DCP. If you do other frame rates, there could be issues where it can't play it back, so you want to be safe. So now you can create a DCP in Resolve Studio version. So they've added that now in version 17. But I'm going to show you guys something called DCP-O-Matic, and it's an open source software. So, it's basically pay what you can. It's dcpomatic.com. And I just make, you can access, you can download, but I just make a note here, please donate if you can to the project, because they take all the money to keep upgrading it. So they've just done new upgrades so they can work with the Apple M1 processor and do things like that. So it's dcpomatic.com. I'm just going to post it in here. dcpomatic.com. That's where you can find that software. Okay, so before we get to Q&A, let's get right into demos. And let me just switch over. So lots of fun stuff. If you have questions, I saw a question here. Surround sound would have 5 master files. So no, so the 5.1 ends up with 6 master files. So left, center, right, left surround, right surround, and the subwoofer, the LFE. So 6 total wave files. So let me just get right into some of the Resolve stuff here. Okay, so how do we master? So let's look at something like DaVinci Resolve. This is version 17. Again, free software you can download, Blackmagic website. And so I just have a file here. So typically we might have like your edited sequence, and then, what do we do with it? So let's look at some of the stuff I talked about. So in terms of loudness monitoring and making it broadcast safe for color grading. So let's have a look right here. So I'm going to just go to the color tab, and I'm just going to go here in the beginning. Now look at the scopes down here. So just on the bottom of my screen right here, the scopes right here, you'll notice like the red and the green are really high up. And so the issue there is that we're above 100, and 0 to 100, you can kind of see that range, 0 to 100. Let me put up the scopes. There we go. Okay, so here's a little bit better. So you can see it's all the way up. There's the waveform and then the RGB parade, so red, green, blue. So this is out of range as it stands for broadcast safe quality. So now what I'll do is I'm going to go to File at the top. I'm going to go to File and Project Settings. I'm going to go to Color Management. And on the bottom, if you scroll right to the bottom, there's a bunch of options. I'm going to go Broadcast Safe Levels, 0 to 100. There's a few options. So here we want to go 0 to 100. I'm going to click Make Broadcast Safe, and I'm going to hit Save. And look at that. It's basically squished it down to 100, and nothing is below 0. So I've made my entire output now, whatever is outputting and mastering from Resolve is now broadcast safe. So it's 0 to 100. So that's step 1. Then we talked a little bit about audio and how this works. So with audio, we get this loudness meter up here when I go to the Fairlight tab. So we have, again, Edit, Fusion, which is like our After Effects type thing, Color, where we do color grading. We go to Fairlight, we have our loudness meter up here. And this gives us an idea of where we are. So I just did a bit of a playback, and it gave me a range of about 19 decibels. So I can, remember we can go up to 23. So I'm in a good position. So I'm just gonna play this. You're not gonna hear it, but I just wanna, what it's doing is it's calculating a range. So, where we are overall. I'm just gonna actually just reset it from the beginning so it learns. I'm gonna hit reset, start, and play it back. And this is gonna start to calculate, hey, what's the overall range of this film? right? So I'm not going to play the whole film back, but as I was showing you, it was, when I did play it back, it was about 19 decibels, the total range. Now, as things get a bit louder, I'm just going to move forward here. I just want to show you guys when we hit, see right here, it gave us a short that it goes yellow. So right up here in the top, it goes yellow. And so I'll just move the mouse around it. So it goes yellow around here, and that's just giving me a little bit of a warning that, hey, you know what? Check that out. It's getting a little bit louder in that range, like short burst. That's increasing the overall decibel range that was a lot lower before. Right, and here we're just hitting red for a quick thing, but look at that. Again, I didn't play it through all the way, so the range is based on the whole film, but we're only hitting 21 as our total range, so we can go up to 23. So we're in a good position. So that's kind of where we can look at loudness monitoring. Now, in terms of the overall, I'm just going to go over here to the control room master. So on this side here, we have the meters. So I have -5, so just under that would be -6. And that's kind of the peak I want. -10 would be kind of music. And look at when I'm playing this back. You can see I'm just, never going up to that -5, -10, kind of a nice range, peaking up to like -6 as kind of that maximum. So that's that kind of range I was talking about of, -6, -10. And again, there could be really quiet spots, right? But that whole range is what's going to show up in the loudness meter. So we want to think about that in the mastering. Okay, so now let's go into the delivery, the rocket ship, and we'll go into some of these formats and how we can deliver them. And they're really, really simple in Resolve. So how do I do ProRes? So I hit ProRes Master. And then I go down here, and I'm going to choose Apple ProRes 422. Okay, and I'm going to say single clip, audio. I'm just going to see 48 kilohertz under audio, 24 bit depth, 1 stereo, and here's my file name. So I just call it Deborah Master. Okay, so again, so now here's some options too. I can go Ultra HD because this is a master. This is an Ultra HD film. I can just do a HD master, and I can do an Ultra HD master in the resolution. So I would recommend doing both. So having an Ultra HD master, ProRes 422 HQ, and then also having a regular HD master, 1920 by 1080. Having both of those, they're always the right kind of blend of having an HD version that you can use where you need and having that Ultra HD version. So if you shot in 4K, you definitely want to have a final master in 4K plus an HD master. Okay, so then from here, I would just go add to render queue, right? That's one. And this is the best part. We can stack and decide all the renders we want to do at once. So then I'm going to say, let's do an H.264 QuickTime. And this one I'm going to just do as an HD. So I'm going to change the resolution. Just check my audio, 48 kilohertz. So I can do variable bitrate constant. We'll just leave those as in the defaults. And video right there. Okay, and same thing here. So I'm going to just go Deborah H.264 HD, add to render queue. So that's 1, 2. Okay, and then what else do we want? If let's say we want to do there's a Vimeo or YouTube preset, so we can just click on those, and those will give us presets in 1080. So those are kind of in the specs. So we can we can call this one Deborah Vimeo HD, add to render queue. Right. So then we add all of those in. We've done our broadcast 100 to 0. We've looked at our loudness, our metering, audio looks good. This is already a film, like all the color grading, editing, and sound mix done. I'm just checking the final levels and then putting that broadcast filter on, because in color grading, probably 90% of all the shots are within the range here, but that opening shot I just held on, it was a bit bright. So that's why I wanted to show you guys how it was over 100. And by using that limiter it just brings it down. It makes it safe. Doesn't really affect the image negatively, just bringing down some of the brightness to put it within the range, and it lifts any of the super dark area if we want too dark. Right, so this way creatively you can color grade and then just get that broadcast safe limiter on in the color grade. Now to render, I just can click on all of these. So I'm my mouse and then the command button. Click on all of them and I hit render all, and it's just going to render those all out. And then I have my masters, and that's it. So again, I can do the HD master, the Ultra HD master, and like a YouTube Vimeo master, and so on. Now, within here, I can go to custom, and this is where I can find the format. I can go to DCP, and then that's where we can do our DCP rendering of files. Again, this is Geo version, so I want to show you guys the DCP-O-Matic and how we can do that. So I'm just not gonna do the renders because they would take, too much more time than we have in this session right now. Probably take 10 minutes in total to do those three. So I'm just gonna quit Resolve, and now I'm gonna open something up. I'm gonna open up the DCP-O-Matic 2. So this is how it opens up. DCP-O-Matic. Again, available at dcpomatic.com. And what I'll do then is I'm going to go new. And that's one of the first things. Just let's name it Deborah 2K DCP. That's just the name of the film. I'm going to decide where it should go. So I'm going to put it in a mastering folder. Okay, so it's going to go there. And then, so that's the first step. Create a new file. And now I'm going to add my file. So I'm going to just find the final, here's my final master that was created. So just imagine we created that in Resolve and we went out with it. I'm going to bring it in here. Okay, and it pretty much finds a lot of stuff right away. And I think this is what's important here. And there's kind of this bottom information that's going to tell you what it's going to do. And it's super, like DCP-O-Matic, it literally is like automatic. It's an amazing piece of software. Again, if you can, donate to their open source software so that it keep getting developed and upgraded. It's an amazing piece of software. Just to note, like this kind of software, DCP stuff, plugins used to cost about $700. Software would be $3,000 to $4,000 even just to buy software. Servicing can cost hundreds of dollars. This is essentially pay what you can, and you can do it on your desktop. Just load in your renders from Resolve, and off you go to creating a DCP. So a really amazing thing. So if, they recommend, hey, can you give us $20, like the price of a couple of movie tickets, that kind of idea. It just keeps them going. So okay, so we've added our file. We can do different cropping and stuff, but here basically what it's telling us is that this content video is Ultra HD. And what it's going to do is it's going to fit a DCI flat 185, and it's going to just put some black on the top and bottom. So you can see right there what it's doing. It's just padding so that it can fit into the container. So it does this all automatically. And we can say yes or not. So we can change some of those ideas too. But we want to just stay to the standards, make it fit into the 185 from our 178 16:9. So it does its magic. It says the frame rate's 23976, so it's going to run at 100.1 so that it can run at a true 24 frames per second. Then in our audio, here's where I'm just going to have to tell it where to go with the two tracks. So it has like track 1, track 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click track 1 is left, and track 2 is right. And you can see how this is set up. It says LRC, LFE, LSRS. So this is where we could link up 6 tracks into the surround. In this case, we have just left, right. And now I'm going to go, let's show a graph of the audio. So I'm just going to kind of get it analyzed as well, and that's fun. It's pretty quick, I think. Yeah, there we go. So it's all good. True peak minus 46. Loudness range is 13.38. So that's what this is quickly showing me. Resolve was, I think, showing me about 19 or so. So, you know, different analysis, but it's again, it's in range. It will actually recommend, you know, looking at your sound if it thinks it's out of range, if the loudness range is too much. So it just gives you a quick idea. Hey, this is going to work. So it won't be rejected by a theater. That, you know, the technician there might say, hey, this is too loud. I don't want this playing here. So that lets you kind of double check what we already did in Resolve. In terms of checking. Okay, so 2D. You can also have a 3D DCP, so you'd have two tracks, a left eye, right eye, so it creates two different films, whole other world, and so on. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, okay? And then what I'm going to do is, so again, I can just play this, okay? And here's the DCP. You can tell it what you can call it what it is, but I'm just saying frame rate 24, right? You can, you know, change different frame rates if you wanted to. The container of what it should be, resolutions 2K or 4K, right? So we can look at changing those there. So we're just going to work in a 2K, and then in here I'm going to say it's a short, just so it knows. So it goes SHR for short, and this again allows the theater projectionist to know that it's a short. They'll know the time because it gives them the time too of what the whole thing is. The whole thing's just under 6 minutes, right? So that's perfect. Okay, and then once we're ready to go, just again save. I'm gonna go to jobs. So there's something also called KDMs, and these are keys. Film festivals really prefer not to have any keys, and the keys are usually more for like larger budget films that want to have a secured screening, so that, you know, the key can be used once, it screens once, and that's it. It can't be played again. So those are kind of locking mechanisms. As independent filmmakers, worst thing in the world wouldn't be that, you know, someone sees it twice in a film festival. So I recommend not worrying about KDM keys, because it's another feature that you have to worry about. And potentially, you know, if you have a short is playing at a screening in a film festival, if they can't get the key working, they're just not going to show your short. So just, you know, keep it flowing, open, and that's my best recommendation for don't worry about the keys especially for a short film for a festival. Okay, so then I'm going to say make DCP. Everything looks good. So there's some hints. So this is where I would tell you, like, hey, your audio seems a bit loud. Maybe you want to look at it, right? So, and then I just go, okay, make DCP. And now it's going to just make it. So 1%, 2%, and it goes from there. So we'll just let that run. Let's get into some questions. And then what it's going to do is just create, basically a folder with about 5 files in it. And there's your DCP. So, you know, we create our ProRes masters. We can create our DCP for film festivals, keeping that audio, you know, in that kind of range. Okay, so let me go over a couple of questions. Okay, so one question here, yeah. So sound, definitely. You know, I'd master to. Let me just pull up the Q&A thing here. So yeah, so sound I would definitely master. Yeah, 48 kilohertz, 24-bit. So 48 kilohertz sampling rate, 24-bit depth. Really should. That's how all the sound should be mastered in terms of you know, mastering sound files. I already answered the one about the surround sound. So there'd be 6 mono files. So left, right, center, left surround, right surround, LFE. Yeah, so if you have any more questions, just you can put them right in the Ask a Question tab there, and I can answer anything. Again, you can rewatch these sessions as we go. Let's just let me just have a quick look at how this is going. Yeah, so it's going to take about 19 minutes. It's rendering at 7 frames per second. So here's just kind of what it's doing. So it examines content, right? So it's, again, really amazing piece of software when it comes down to it, just with, you know, what's possible in it. Then once the DCP is done, what you can do is, try to remember if I have let me just try and pull up I think I have a master file in one of these. But you can actually pull up a DCP. There's something called DCP Player that I recommend downloading as well. And the DCP Player allows you to then open the DCPs. Yeah, so basically you would just load your DCP and you can play it back. So now, why do we load that? It's to make sure that it plays in sync and that there's no issue. Okay, so here's a good question. So the SMPTE or interop. Right now, what I've been looking at, it doesn't matter. Most projection systems, DCP players can do both. They've been updated. So this one by default does a SMPTE version. And then you can choose to do it a interop version. So that's just two types of DCPs, and most of the software now is just doing like a SMPTE version, and that's fine. But either's fine. I've delivered in both formats, and essentially every kind of screen out there can deal with either one. Both are DCI standards for cinema, so again, that standards thing. So that means every theater that is playing DCPs has to be able to play both. Until it stays as a standard. So just keep your eye out. If interop gets dropped and they say you can no longer use that, then I would avoid going that way, and that's what I would do there. Yeah. So here's just a question. So doing the editing, and you edit in your desired editing software. So Adobe Premiere, DaVinci, Blackmagic Resolve, Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve, and then you put it into the DCP-O-Matic to create your DCP. So it's not where you necessarily master for, it's not your video master, but that's your cinema or film festival theatrical master is the digital cinema package DCP. So that's where that comes into play. So, but your masters you can do directly in Adobe Premiere or DaVinci. So Adobe Premiere, you can also do a ProRes HQ422. Now I should mention, it is an Apple based, so it's Apple ProRes. So sometimes you might not have it loaded. So if you're on a Windows system, you might not have the capability to do the Apple ProRes. So in that case, that's why I mentioned that earlier. You can do the Avid DNX HD, which would be an available format. There's a couple other ones. There's like a HR, so they have kind of like 4K versions, but it's the Avid DNX family of codecs. So that's an alternative if you're on a system that, like a Windows computer that might not have ProRes, the Apple codecs loaded, you can go to that DNX as well. So that's what you can do there. So, okay, perfect. So yeah, let's we'll start to wrap things up here. So again, really thanks for joining me. I want to again thank all our partners in this project. We have the Canada Council for the Arts, our library partners, Blue Mountains Public Library, Collingwood Public Library, and the Wasaga Beach Public Library. You can check out the computers at there. So if you have a membership, check out the equipment, the computers, and we're going to be putting this DCP-O-Matic software. We're going to load on the computers as well. So that's good news, so that it can be accessed, and all the computers have DaVinci Resolve. The iMacs at the libraries have DaVinci Resolve Studio, so you can do your DCPs that way as well. So you kind of have the options of both ways. And yeah, so if you're on this Crowdcast, there's a question here. If you're on this Crowdcast session, you can rewatch right after we finish. Alternatively, we will post these on our YouTube channel. So usually within 48 hours, we'll post everything on the YouTube channel. So you can check out the videos there. A lot of content there just about editing and video production as well. So definitely check that out. In the meantime, yeah, thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of the day, and enjoy doing your mastering. And always think about what you're doing, what you need to master in, or who you're mastering for. If it's going to be for festivals, then go back and think about the formats and frame rates and make sure it's going to be easier. You don't want to make extra work for yourself in the mastering phase. So again, have a great rest of the day, and thanks for joining us. Take care.